Hello, my name is Nathan Schneider, and welcome to interview number two. Today I'm joined by the one and only Gordon Goodwin. He's the band leader for Gordon Goodwin's Big Fat Band. He has worked with jazz greats like Quincy Jones or even Ray Charles. All right, so how are you?
I'm good. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. All right, so first question. In your eyes, how has the jazz scene in Los Angeles evolved over the years?
It's devolved. It's gotten considerably worse. Just in terms of outlets for
Mhm.
artists to play and the economic value for most people of what they can charge and what people can afford and all that stuff has gotten kind of tentative. And it
Yeah.
was never it was never great, but it used to be, when I was your age, you
Mhm.
know, it would there was probably five or six pretty strong jazz rooms you could play in if you were a jazz musician. I don't think that the even the legendary guys when I was in high school, the people I looked up to, would play in clubs in LA, and it's not like they were making great money.
Yeah.
Any, but you know, $50 or $75 a night in 1970 was a little more than it is now. Still not enough, really, but it was kind of doable. And there's a lot of guys that made their living just playing jazz. Um, Probably it was more effective in New York than it was in LA. If you wanted to be
Yeah.
a jazz musician and be respected for what that was. In Los Angeles, though, a lot of jazz musicians were able to supplement their income from doing studio work. Not all of them, but a lot of them that were trained that could read music. And if you're a woodwind player, you could play saxophone, flute, clarinet, and you could play music other than jazz, kind of classical music or pop music, and that enabled you to make some money, do a
Mhm.
recording session, get some royalties, and then those guys would then go play their jazz music at night. So they kind of had like a dual life, musically speaking. Um, these days, actually there's a little bit of a renaissance in people that are opening up rooms for musicians to play in, but it doesn't pay great, and you have to really work as an artist to get your audience there. At least until a room like a Catalina Jazz Club or Vibrato, which is owned by Herb Alpert. Those two
Yeah.
rooms have a reputation, and so people will go, oh, let's see who's at Catalina tonight. They just would go down there knowing they're going to hear some good music. There's some other rooms that have opened up and are trying to build their reputation. Takes some time, but it's not an easy road. Then again, it really doesn't matter how easy or hard the road is. If you love anything, if you love jazz, you're just gonna do what it takes, and to get your music out there and to have a life in that music.
But do you think like LA's entertainment industry like impacts the opportunities for jazz musicians in LA?
Well, yeah, in a positive way, it can. I mean, most of the guys in my band, in the Big Fat Band, do recording sessions. Now, these guys are so you can learn music a couple ways. You can play it with your heart, with your ears, or with your mind, or some combination of those things, right? And so, but if you've learned music in a traditional pedagogy like classical music training, you're going to go to
Yeah.
college and you're going to study, music theory, music history, and counterpoint, and you're going to study your instrument from a practical standpoint. And it's not about finding your voice as a musician. Whereas if you grow up playing and you're self-taught and you just play in bands, in clubs, or wherever you can find, you will find your way to your own voice quicker as a jazz musician. But most of the time, a lot of those folks have gaps in their training. Just maybe their intonation on their instruments not quite as good, or their sight reading is not quite as good because they just didn't have the exposure to those skill sets. And it's kind of a tricky one, because a lot of times, let's face it, how much does it cost to go to college these days? Plenty. it's cost. Matter of fact, it really costs way too much to go to college. So other people say, "Well, I can't do that. I'm just going to learn on my own." Nowadays, people are learning on the internet. You know, plenty
Mhm.
of information on YouTube and other places. It's harder to vet the information. You have to be able to kind of know if the person you're listening to has authority, to speak. But the entertainment industry as a whole, I'm grateful for it, but it's changed over the course of my career. So, I mean, I'm sitting here and I got, surrounded by samplers and computers.
Yeah.
Whereas when I first came up, I had a pencil and a piece of paper and a piano. That's how I wrote music. And so I had to retool maybe 10 years into my career because all of a sudden there was a computer, home computer, and I had to learn how that worked. And then as the technology got more and more sophisticated, I had to learn how that worked and spent a lot of my time. Like I just installed a new computer the other day,
Oh yeah.
and I know that I'm in for about 2 weeks of problems where things don't quite work because just that you have to make sure that it's all tweaked right. And that's a discipline that I had to learn over the years. So, um, but there was no choice because the entertainment industry demanded that music be composed in this fashion. If I compose on a computer, I can print a little mix and give it to the director, and he can hear it and go, "Oh, okay, I hear what that sounds like." In the old days, a composer would sit with the director at a piano and just play it. Go, okay, here's going to be trumpets, and this will be strings, and just to have both parties use their imagination to
Yeah.
picture what it's going to be like. That's what it used to be, but those days are gone. Um, but you adjust or retire is pretty much what the rule is.
Yeah. So, what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities for jazz musicians in LA today?
Um, Probably the biggest challenge for jazz musicians, but really for anybody, is finding out who you are. What do you believe in? What do you love?
Mhm.
What do you want to dedicate your life to? And if you just decide what that is there anybody that will pay you money for that? And jazz musicians found that fewer and fewer people were going to pay money to hear a music that was no longer that popular and took a little bit of a commitment to understand. With jazz and classical music too, there's a lot of data coming at you. And so your ears have to be trained enough, discerning enough to kind of process all that data coming your way. Honestly, most pop music has much less information, simpler. It's got a groove. It feels a certain way, and most people can interpret music from how it makes them feel. But not everybody can interpret music, with their intellect, like their right brain and their left brain. So because that changed, jazz musicians who play a lot of music with complexity and sophistication found that not as many people, especially the people that were hiring, um, were interested in what they were doing.
Yeah.
And so, when you're a kid or you're in your, early 20s and, you live in an apartment and, your nut isn't that high, um, you probably get away with doing whatever you want. But then somewhere along the way, maybe you get to be about 30 and you meet a girl and you fall in love and you decide to get married. And then before you know it, you have a kid and then another kid. And then, you decide to maybe I could buy this house. And so all of a sudden, you're your parents and you got responsibilities and you gotta pay for your kids' stuff. And kids are expensive, maybe you
Yeah.
noticed, and buying a house in LA, really expensive. All that stuff is not supportable under a jazz income. And I met a lot of jazz musicians that were a generation or two above me. They got to be like in their 60s or 70s, even their 50s, and their health started to dip and they had no money. They didn't have a retirement fund. you got a guy working in an accountant office, for his whole life. Maybe he's got a boring life, but he's got a retirement. And jazz musicians mostly don't. Now, if you play on a movie, if you work on a union gig, then they do have money that will go into a retirement fund. And if you do it long enough, you can have enough money to support yourself. So I knew these jazz musicians when I got out of college, and they were hurting. They never thought about it. All they thought about was, I'm going to play the music that's important to me, right? And that's what they did. And then when they got a bit older, and all of a sudden they're not as healthy, and there's less gigs. And what are they going to do? And I remember I was shocked by it. I go, oh my God, these are my idols. And I would
Mhm.
see how much they're suffering, because nobody pulled them aside when they were 20 and said, you better save up. If you
Mhm.
want to play this music, you better get a plan to do it. No, and nobody ever said that to me either, except for I had a friend who was a drummer in my high school band. He was really good too, but he decided to not go into music. He was going to go into finance.
Mhm.
So he was smart about money. So he pulled me aside. I might have been 28, 27 years old. He goes, Gordon, here's what we're going to do. You're going to put like $250 a month out of your checking account into the savings account, and we're going to start saving up for your retirement. And I'm 27. I'm going, what are you, retirement? What are you talking about? But you know what? He was the best thing that ever happened to me because I saved some money. I saved money from my kids' college funds, started back then. If you start early, there's this thing called compound interest you'll learn about, and then your money just starts making more, building on itself. Anyway, these jazz guys that I'm talking about, they never really had that instruction or that information. So it became hard.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if that's the answer to the question you asked, but
Yeah, that's fine.
important thing for young people to kind of consider.
Yeah. All right. So, what's your opinion on like the jazz programs all over LA, like including the LA Unified School District?
It's been a tough road for them too. Okay, I remember when I was a kid, maybe in high school, and California had this proposition 13, I think it was, and
Mhm.
basically it was a proposition to save taxpayers from having to pay as much taxes in um, in California. And my dad, who was not a musician, he was a teacher too, but he goes, well, that's going to be bad for the arts. And I didn't know what he meant. Now I do. Well, the reason it was bad is because funding for music programs and theater programs, dance programs, first thing to get cut. Schools gotta cut their budgets. What are they gonna do? Cut the football program? Are you kidding? They're gonna do that, right? They're gonna cut that music and the arts is thought of by a lot of people as superfluous. Pretty good if you want, but not necessary. Now, those of us that participate in the arts know that it's more than just entertainment. An understanding of the arts is good for your spirit, for the human condition. It's important for flexibility of your mind. So many things that we know, but in most states they started chopping that music budget, and so you had a situation where didn't have enough money for instruments or instruments repair or band uniforms or all that stuff. So then they used to have to go to the band booster program, go to mom and dad. We need to raise money. Let's do a car wash. Let's do a cookie bake. Let's whatever. They started to have to do that stuff just to kind of stay even. Some schools had it harder than others. This is like at the high school level. In college, their funding was a little better, but um, the cost of college tuition kept going up, up, and up. You know what I paid to go to Cal State Northridge?
Much.
500 bucks a semester.
Mm.
You know what it cost to go to Berkeley and Boston?
How much?
My kid went there in about 10 years ago,
Yeah.
and it was 70,000 a year.
Hmm.
I'm paying 1,000 a year, and Berkeley 70,000. Um, Go to SC, you're going to pay unless you get a scholarship, you know. And so I think that the level of instruction at these colleges, Northridge, SC, Long Beach, North Texas State, Berkeley, plenty of schools you could name, the level of instructors is very high. The level of the information is really good. And plus, you have people teaching that are also out in the field playing, doing gigs and composing. So people, the two, education and then the real world of being a professional musician has kind of, you know, intersected, which is good. But here's my question for a jazz musician. You're going to go to a school and be a jazz major and study John Coltrane licks and learn all about bebop and which takes a long time. It's a lot of stuff to learn,
Uh-huh.
and you're going to learn that, and you're going to get out of college, and then what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Who's going to pay you to play John Coltrane licks? As great as they are, what are you going to do? That is the question that I don't know how to answer. And if I taught more than I did, I don't know what I would tell. I mean, part of me says you got to follow your heart. If you're, whatever you do in life, you got to follow your heart.
Mm.
But if your heart tells you to do something that has no economic value, you're going to pay a price. And if you have kids, your kids are going to pay the price. You know,
Yeah.
so tough, right? It's
Mhm.
impossible because when I was your age, Nathan, I just did what I wanted. I wanted to be a saxophone player. I wanted to write music and play the piano, and no one was going to stop me. I never gave a minute's thought to how do I get money. And for a while, it just came to me. Like I got a call to play in a band, and we would play dances. I'd be up there playing the saxophone or the piano, just playing, corny music but it paid pretty good. In college, I got $50 a gig, and then after a while, it went up to 75 and then 100 or more. Um, but then my real break was a friend of mine heard they were having auditions at Disneyland and they were hiring musicians. So he goes, "You want to go down and audition?" So I went down and auditioned and got the gig. So I'm playing at Disneyland 5 days a week. And I was going, "This is amazing." Because I love Disneyland, right? Who doesn't love Disneyland? So
Yeah.
going down there and I'm playing in a band, 5 shows a day. I got vacation pay. I got some kind of minor benefits, but more obviously I had a paycheck, and plus there was all kinds of great musicians, tons of pretty girls, like dancers and singers and stuff, and it was like, oh, this is incredible. And so I did that for a while, and then they asked me to compose something for them, like, can you do some arrangements for a show we have? That was what turned it for me. My first professional arranging job was at Disneyland, and I still work for that company, all those years later. So I kind of fell into that opportunity. And to be sure, theme parks, cruise ships still hire a lot of musicians. They're definitely
Yeah.
uh, positions, for musicians to play. Not as many as there used to be, I don't think, but they still have them. So that was good for me and still something that can work. But there are fewer opportunities for people just starting out than there were when I came out. Yeah. Plus, when you combine that with the fact that it costs more money to live, to get an apartment, you get your first apartment, you're probably going to have three roommates at least. That's what one of my sons is doing that. Both sons have roommates. You know, that's the only way that it can. Especially depending on where you live. You live in an expensive area like you guys live, like I live. It can be a little tricky.
Yeah.
So I don't want to come off overtly negative about it,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. But I think you need to go into this with your eyes wide open and get a plan. Work with your parents, get some sort of a financial counselor to help figure out, or a life counselor, what's the best way forward, as a young musician.
Yeah. All right. So last question. What are your favorite venues or hidden gems in LA for experiencing live jazz?
Well, I can think of several. The Big Fat Band plays at two primarily. Catalina Jazz Club on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood, and they've been around for a long, long time.
Mm.
Herb Alpert has a club called Vibrato, and Herb Alpert, in the '60s, was a huge star. He had a band called the Tijuana Brass instrumental band, and he had a record label called A&M Records, which had people like Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson, Sting, a lot of the Carpenters,
Yeah.
and he's a wonderful man. I'm actually friends with him now, and he's used a lot of his money. Like he gave a bunch of money to UCLA, to the college, and they've got a Herb Alpert School of Music there.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, he's got a club. There's a club in Ventura called the Grape. We played there. It's a great club. There's a used to be a club called the Blue Whale. They had to close down.
Oh.
There's one called the Ride Off Room, which is in Studio City on Ventura Boulevard, and they're working hard to put together a cool room that people can go. And there's a new room. Well, probably the most famous jazz club is called the Blue Note,
Yeah, the
and
blue.
there's one in New York City. There's one in Tokyo that the Fat Man, we just got back from there a couple months ago, played
Oh,
a
yeah, yeah.
week there. And they're opening a club in LA, also on Sunset
And
Boulevard.
Sunset, yeah, I saw that.
The Blue Note Los Angeles. And they're also, the Blue Note is going to take over the Hollywood Bowl Jazz Festival,
Hmm.
which used to be the Playboy Jazz Festival, when Playboy and Hugh Hefner kind of sponsored jazz and kept it going. Fat Man did that twice. And then it turned into the Hollywood Bowl Jazz Festival. We've done that twice. And hopefully, now that it's the Blue Note Jazz Festival, we'll be able to do that again.
Yeah, I love that
I'm
name
sure
too.
there's probably more smaller rooms, that I'm not aware. There's a
Yeah.
place by the airport called Sam First, I think it's called.
Hmm.
A small little room. It's got a nice piano, and a lot of guys like to go and play at that place. I think it's down by the airport somewhere.
Okay.
So, um, you know, you I think you have to be an entrepreneur. Like if you've got a band and you want to play, you find any place you can. You might have to play for free. If you go to your local mall and say, "Hey, can my band come and play some Christmas tunes here?" For your shoppers, we'll do it for free for an hour on Saturday. Or a small coffee shop or any place.
Yeah.
You got to get out there and make it happen. And the truth is, you never know what door is going to open for you because you made a decision to get out there, whatever it is. You just don't know. I didn't know that by taking that gig as a saxophone player and a piano player at Disneyland would lead to my writing career. It wasn't a plan. It just happened.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, when I was in fourth grade, I fell in love with Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. I mentioned them a minute ago.
Yeah.
And so I loved them so much that I took my dad's lawnmower and I went to my neighbor and I knocked on the door. I said, "Can I mow your grass up for $1?" So I said, "Oh," so I mowed the grass. And then I went to my another neighbor and I mowed his grass. So I mowed over a course of a couple of weekends, 10 or 12 people's yards, and I got $12. And I had enough to buy the Herb Alpert and Tijuana Brass songbook. So I bought it, went to the music store and bought it, and put my Herb Alpert band together. First band was in fourth grade.
Yeah.
And now I'm friends with him. I could call him up, and he's like a jazz legend. And so you just don't know,
Mhm.
and so it's a matter of being bold and going for it. I spent a lot of years of my life being a little bit too shy,
Yeah.
a little too polite. You got to be who you got to be. If you're a shy guy, you're a shy guy. But
Hmm.
they're not going to knock on your door and hand you your life. You
So,
know,
so you just have to
you
go
have
for it.
got to go for it. And you know what? If they say no, they say no.
Hmm.
They say, okay, you go on, move on to the next guy. So I know I'm giving you some wide-ranging answers to your
Yeah,
questions,
yeah.
but I hope it's of
Very
some
good.
value.
Yeah. All right. So those are all the questions I have for today. So once
All
again,
right.
yeah, thanks for coming on to this interview and have a great day. All right.
Thank you, Nathan. Best of luck to you.
Mhm.